Bonjour, Montreal. I'm Mamtha. I'm a technologist, a mom, and an entrepreneur with a mission to get more women into tech. And so about 10 years ago, I was a developer, tech lead, a dev manager. I was focused on delivering features, performance tuning. I had no exposure, in fact, no idea about marketing, business, finance, or fundraising. And networking was not my thing. Well, today, I hope that all of you leave this place with like a snapshot, a primer on all the steps to doing a startup. So are you ready for this? Yes. Awesome. All right. So we'll quickly go through the concepts, what a business model canvas is, the process of customer development, building an MVP, going to market, teams, mentors, and a high level of what's available for accelerators and funding. This is a favorite quote of mine. So ideas are plenty. And an idea really has no value, or not much value. And I have to agree with Alice in this, right? The economic term for what you have is nothing. But we all always have ideas, right? I get like one a day at least. And so one of the first things we have to do is to focus on validating your idea. And that is the hardest problem for us to solve. And if you look at this as a list of things that you have to start on, you start with the idea and market. And everything else comes later. And when you think of a startup, you think of, fundraising. But you know what? Fundraising comes much, much later. Forbes did a study recently on the top 3 reasons why startups fail. And as you can see, the first one is that there was no market need, as that's the top reason. And the second is when startups run out of cash and they're not able to continue. And the third is co-founder issues. So it's very important to have like the right team. So let's, I don't know how many of you remember Yo. So this was an app. It was this was an app. All it did was you could send Yo to your friends. And your friends could Yo back to you. But obviously somebody here thinks it was amazing. But the question here really is, what problem were they trying to solve, right? And I'll spend the bulk of my time on this. This is a framework, a business model canvas, and this is a lean version of it by Ash Maurya. And it focuses really on identifying what you're trying to solve and everything that you need to kind of put together. It's almost like a one-page business plan for you, right? It helps you structure your ideas. So if you look at it, the number one is what you're looking at is what are your top 3 problems that you're trying to solve, and who is your target customer. Once you figure that out, then you look at what is a simple, clear way to quantify what is your unique value proposition here, right? And what you would tell your customers. And then you go later on to number 3, which is the top 3 solutions, features for your solution, and how do you reach your customers, your cost structure, the revenue streams, your key metrics, and so on. So let's go through this example. So last November, the New York Times ran this article which said that YouTube Kids were showing disturbing videos. And parents were stressed out, and kids were stressed out, because one of these videos was showing some of the characters dying. Right? So this is a problem. And let's figure out how we would put this into our framework. Right? So what are our top 3 problems here? Kids are exposed to unsafe content. Parents are stressed out. And kids are stressed out. Let's look at our target customers. YouTube Kids is usually used by younger kids, around 5 and below. So we would focus on working parents who are busy and who are giving tablets to their kids, right? And younger kids under 5. And next, you would look at a solution, right? So what would the top 3 features be of your solution? It could be that you're focusing on a safe, curated video service. And how would you, what would your clear, compelling message be? You could say things like, you know what, we'll have it curated by moms, right? So this is a service that is provided by moms, or that has parent approval, ratings, and identifying ways in which you are able to solve the problem for your customers. And then looking at your channels, how would you sell this, right? You could partner with, say, Kindle for kids, or you could partner with tablets and PTAs in schools, or just finding channels, bloggers who focus on parents, or parenting magazines to either resell or market your product. And from a cost structure and revenue streams, right? You would look at how much does it take to acquire a customer. So I can give you an example. So for some of our products, one of the first things we would do is we would run Facebook ads. We would say, you know what, even if it's just $10 a day, right? You're looking at your target customers. You're able to figure out, oh, you know, anybody who actually shops at like a Target or a certain store, like moms with at least 2 kids, and you run ads with your clear, compelling message, and see how many people click, right? How many are you able to convert? And use these metrics to really identify where you want to spend your money. And so as a product person, right, you always think, you know what, I'll build and they will come. But unfortunately, that's not the truth. So you really have to get out of the building. You have to talk to customers. You have to find out what the insights from them. So I'll give you an example. So for one of my previous startups, we said, you know what, as parents, we really felt that our kids did not know the basics of saving and finance, personal finance. So we actually wanted to build this app called Magic Bank, which would help kids learn through gamification, simple concepts about money. And we started talking to a lot of parents. We would have focus groups. We would go to places like playgrounds where parents were there and ask them questions. And a lot of times, it can be a leading question. You can say, you know what, I have this app, will you use it? Unfortunately, you have to try to figure out what is the problem, what are the problems that parents are facing. That's when we actually realized that parents were less concerned about teaching kids value of money. They were more concerned that kids were spending a lot more time on devices and screen time, and that they didn't have control over it. And that's how we actually came up with the idea, because it was through our customer development that we found out what the big issues were. And one of the other things was that kids were only 2 to 3 clicks away from adult content on YouTube. And so really, a lot of these insights can come by spending time talking to customers and trying to find out who your customer is, right? You want to really target the audience. And when you first build it, it has to be extremely, extremely narrow. Finding out what problems, where are they spending their time? And a lot of these is by just listening, asking questions like, tell me more, right? And trying to understand what your customers are doing, where are they spending their time. And then comes iterating on your product. And all of you have heard of MVP, the minimum valuable product, or what I'd like to call, or the minimum viable product. And these days, they even, I just read about it yesterday, a minimum lovable product, right? You want, even if you have a few customers, you want them to love your product versus having many more customers who just like it. And your initial, what we call early adopters, will help shape your product. And it's also a whole question of being iterative and getting some features out. I'll give you an example that for our video app, my co-founder and I built a very simple MVP. It was not even on the App Store. We had just submitted it. We maybe spent 1 to 2 months building it. We spent very little money on it, hired a designer for like $10 an hour, a very basic product. And we put something together, and I flew to San Francisco to a kids conference, and I was walking around with this app. And what was interesting is we had 3 different companies stop by and say, you know what, can you build that for me? So what we realized is, even though we thought we are going to build an app for ourselves, that the need was greater for other companies. And so we ended up actually white labeling that product and hiring a team and getting one of the top designers to help us out. And we took that MVP to like the next level. Marketing strategy. There are different ways to market your product. There's like word of mouth. You're spending money on, like I said, Facebook ads, SEM, SEO, partnering with other companies who are in your field. So I'll give you another example. So one of my first startups was in personal finance, and we built one of the first online tax filing systems in India. And this was over 10 years ago. And we were looking at who our users were, and we realized that a lot of our users were actually tax preparers versus like the end consumer who we built it for. And then we realized that these tax preparers were actually charging, these were in like small companies, charging others and using our product to file taxes. So it takes time. So then what we realized is we then started marketing to them, going to websites and channels that they were using. So some of it actually takes time, trying to come up with a marketing strategy and figure out who your channels are. Who's your Yoda? All of us, you don't know what you don't know, right? We all need mentors. And you need mentors for a lot of areas that you're not an expert at. When I was going through Techstars, I had over 100 mentors. I'm not kidding, or close to 100 mentors. We had one mentor helping us out on putting together press releases, another one on marketing, a few others in just doing up pitches, giving us feedback. So a startup, it's like it takes a village to build a startup. And you absolutely do not have all the skills, and your team is really small, and you're stretched. You depend a lot on your mentors to help move you forward. And for my first startup, I did not have mentors, and I could tell. I mean, it took a lot, because you have to start from scratch. You're trying to read up, Google. I'll give you an example. So I went from being an engineer and had to go to a press conference. I mean, I had never done a press conference before. Forget even talking to the press, right? So I wish I had mentors then who could have helped us navigate that landscape. The team is extremely important. As we said before, it's in the top 3 reasons why startups fail. And instead of hiring somebody who's like you, try to hire someone who has the same values, but brings in a different perspective, and who has a skill set that's more diverse, and who can fill in the gaps. And focus a lot, especially in the early days, on identifying folks who are more flexible and, as I said, share the same values, as you're spending hours night and day with these people. So it's extremely, extremely important to have the right team in place in the early days. Funding options. So bootstrapping is obviously the first option. And most startups in the early days are bootstrapped by the founders. And it takes a while to raise funding, either to go through accelerators, approach investors. A lot of networking is involved, and it's not easy. And you're trying to do all of this while you're building your product, you're talking to your customers, you're trying to do your marketing, you're building your team out. And taking time out for funding is hard. So my recommendation would be, at least in the early days, to focus on building the product, getting the right customers, and leave fundraising for later. But accelerators are definitely a very good option. This data has been updated in the last 1 year, but as you can see, only 15% of the seed funding has been in women-led startups. And it may have increased by a little, maybe to 16%. And I saw some recent numbers from 2017. But really, look at this and think of it as an opportunity to kind of even this out. I was researching on what is the global ranking of startup ecosystems, and Canada is number 3. And the top 3 cities in Canada which have a really good ecosystem are Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. So you are in the top 3 here. So you could make use of this. And I just pulled up a few areas of where Founder Fuel is based out of Montreal. There's startup weekends, Techstars in Toronto, and Launch Academy in Vancouver. I'm sure there are many, many more. So I just wanted to end with this startup curve. Most people, so when you first start, they call it the TechCrunch effect, or you get your early adopters. You get a press release out, and then you have a bunch of people download your app or use your software, and then it drops off. right? How many apps do you have which you heard of and you downloaded and then you don't use them after that first time? And that's where you go into what is called the trough of sorrow. It's like a circle. And one of these sayings, it says that, when you're, the best thing about startups, you experience only two emotions. Euphoria and terror. So, and the euphoria comes and goes. And when it's not there, you're like, oh, what's going on? Like, how do I get my next user? I'm going to end with this. So, are you the next Rosie? I'd like to see more women entrepreneurs.
Any questions?
Hi. I just have two questions, actually. First, when you were building your startup, were you working somewhere else?
So for both of my startups, after I kind of got into the idea and was, of course, the passion kicks in, I did quit. Yeah. So when I did work on the startup, I was working on it full time. But I would, though, recommend, now looking back, it's good to do a lot of your customer development and some of your research while you have a job. And when you really feel like, you are onto something, that's a good time to quit. But yeah, building a startup takes a lot. Like, it takes everything, like 200% of your time. So.
And how did you find your mentors? And were they working for free, or they were asking for like percentage or something?
Good question. So when we were in Techstars, our mentors were all part of the program. And also we reached out, people would just tell us to connect to other startup founders or successful entrepreneurs or VCs. They were all free. We never had to pay for anybody. But however, there are times when you feel that somebody is providing a lot of value and you could give them some equity. Yeah.
Yeah, by the way, I think Techstars recently joined with Founder Fuel for a program in Montreal for AI specifically. So.
Hi. Hi. So would you say that the startup and, let's say, a side project are the same thing, or are they two different things? Like, if somebody has a passion project that they are feeding into on their part-time as they work a day job, do you think that they should be looked at the same way as a startup, or a different
Yeah,
way?
I think so. Yeah, you should be. I mean, it depends on if, at some point, if you want that to be your full-time thing.
So would you change your strategy at all, given the presentation that you just gave? Like, because there's a lot of initiative at the beginning of a startup, but with a passion project, presumably there's like, that's already been built up for several years.
Okay. So it's like a side hustle, what you're talking about.
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
So that doesn't necessarily generate income, but it's like, has substance to it already.
Got it. It depends. If you really think you want to grow it, and you really want to work on it full time, if not, you would keep it as a side hustle. Yeah.
Thanks.
Hi. For the early stages of funding, particularly within the, I hear it a lot in the Montreal startup ecosystem about how, bootstrapping is gold. It's, it is the way to do things. And I find in talking to people that there's a certain financial luxury of being able to bootstrap your startup for X number of months and be unemployed. How do we increase diversity in people, particularly diversity of different financial backgrounds of people wanting to start a startup? Like, what advice do you give people who don't have the funds to bootstrap, or how do we help people kind of through that stage who can't afford it on their own so that they still have the same opportunities as the people who can?
Okay. I think there are two ways of doing this. One is, as I said, you can start it as a side hustle. And when you feel it has enough legs, then to try to go through an accelerator, because the accelerator gives you funding upfront, right? And that helps a lot. And the second one is what we did for my previous startup, when I said that I went to this conference and I had different companies saying that they wanted this product. So we white labeled it and used that funding to build out our startup. So we were getting paid for the white label, even though that was not our end goal. We said, you know what, if this is going to generate cash flow, let's do it. And while we did that, we were building our startup on the side. So that's another model where you're getting some income from a services type of a model, and you're using that for your startup. But it gets harder along the way, though.
For the early stages of validating your idea, before doing a market research or something like that, how can we say this is feasible or there's an interest? How can we validate if there is a potential to the idea without outing ourselves, like in social media or something like that?
Yeah. So that's where I talked about what I call qualitative time or qualitative research, talking to your customers. And you can also do quantitative, sending out surveys and trying to collect feedback. So I always tell people, talk to at least 100 customers. Because then you actually have enough data, you have enough data points, and you've had several conversations, and you're able to gather the information to validate your idea. And another way, as I said, is you send out surveys, right? Surveys, you can even pay to get people to answer surveys. Like we used Google and a bunch of other platforms. So you get larger scale, but you don't know a lot of the whys. So you can do multiple things to actually get ideas. And like I said, you can also run these small ads, even with just some keywords, right? You don't have to, it doesn't have to be much. And you can look at Google Trends to see other people who are searching for this, right? There are multiple ways to get the data without, and to validate it.
Maybe one last question?
You mentioned you started your startup full-time. Now that you're at Expedia full-time, are you finding ways to continue to follow this passion and get women in technology?
Yes. So I mentor a lot of startup founders in the Seattle area. I'm also mentored at the Masters in Entrepreneurship program at the University of Washington, and I'm active in the startup circle. And as I said, the other passion about mentoring women at Expedia, I spend a lot of time looking at ways and means to. We recently organized a speed mentoring for the women in tech in lodging, the space that I'm in. And so we have a team here from Expedia, and Expedia has a lot of job openings in Montreal. So that's a small pitch for the team here. So if anybody's interested, we are looking for folks.
Thank you very much
Thank you.
for your talk.